It all started with a gnome. Not a noisy dog, a paint-chipped fence, or a fleet of RVs parked on my lawn. A single, cheerful, ceramic garden gnome named Barnaby. My 7-year-old daughter, Lily, won him at a school fair by successfully guessing the number of jelly beans in a jar. Her guess of 1,000,000 was, tragically, not the winner, but she got the consolation prize. She placed him proudly by our front porch, his cheerful, painted smile and pointy red hat pointing towards our welcome mat, as if to say, "Friends are this way. I'm a reasonable guy. I mow my lawn every Saturday. I keep my trash cans hidden. And I once spent 3 hours power washing my driveway just to hear my neighbor, Dave, mutter, 'Looks good,' from over the fence. I live a quiet life. Or I did. I suppose in a neighborhood like Pleasant Meadows, where conformity is king, any spark of personality is seen as a direct threat to the sovereign. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was nestled between a pizza coupon flyer and an electric bill, but it commanded attention. Printed on thick, expensive cardstock with the embossed header of the Pleasant Meadows Homeowners Association. It felt less like a notice and more like a wedding invitation from hell, the kind where the RSVP is just you surrendering your soul. I read it aloud to my wife, Sarah, over dinner, putting on my best stuffy, bureaucratic voice for the more pompous phrases. We both chuckled. It was so absurd it felt like a parody. I showed it to Lily, who was, however, genuinely horrified. "But Barnaby is part of the family," she wailed, her lower lip trembling. "He protects the flowers." "Don't worry, sweetie," I said, ruffling her hair. "It's just a silly letter from a very bored person. Barnaby isn't going anywhere. Oh, you sweet summer child." Me, not Lily. She was wiser than I was. I had just made a critical, naive error. I had mistaken the opening shot of a war for a mere firecracker. I'd failed to understand that in the meticulously manicured jungles of suburbia, the most dangerous predator isn't the one that roars, but the one that writes. I didn't remove Barnaby. This was a hill I was willing to die on. A small, whimsical, pointy-hatted hill. My defiance was a quiet one. I simply ignored the letter, filing it away in a drawer I mentally labeled future amusement. I even gave Barnaby a little pat on the head the next morning for solidarity. My wife, Sarah, was less amused. "It's just a gnome, Alex. Is this really the fight you want?" But it wasn't about the gnome anymore. It was about the principle. Or maybe I was just being stubborn. A week later, a second letter arrived. This one was heavier, as if the sheer weight of its own self-importance had been physically infused into the paper. The tone had shifted from passive-aggressive to just aggressive. The words "lean action" were bolded and underlined, screaming up from the page. Alien. For a gnome, the sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was almost impressive. I decided to be an adult to try and reason with the unreasonable. I picked up the phone and called the number on the letter. Patricia Whitlock answered on the first ring, her voice a crisp, judgmental monotone, like a GPS giving directions to a funeral. "Pleasant Meadows HOA, Patricia speaking." "Hi, Patricia. This is Alex from 1428 Willow Creek. I'm calling about the violation notices for my daughter's garden gnome. The unapproved lawn figurine," she corrected, her tone implying it was a biohazard. "Yes. Have you removed it?" "Well, no. I was hoping we could talk about it. It's a small gnome. It makes my daughter happy. And it's not hurting anyone." I heard a sharp intake of breath, the sound a vacuum seal makes when you close a lid. Mr. Redacted, happiness is not a recognized exemption under the bylaws. Uniformity is the bedrock of our community's property values. Your gnome is a slippery slope. First a gnome, then a pink flamingo, next thing you know we're a trailer park with cars on cinder blocks. She said trailer park with the same disdain one might reserve for a war crime. I was speechless. The conversation was over. Hanging up, I looked out the window at my perfectly average, perfectly compliant house, and then at Barnaby's cheerful, painted face. That's when I stopped being just a reasonable homeowner and started being a slightly annoyed, legally trained one. You see, my quiet life has a context. I'm a judge, and Patricia had just declared war on the wrong gnome owner. I'm not a dramatic person. I preside over small claims, contract disputes, the dry, dusty machinery of civil law. My world is one of precedents and procedures, not petty lawn ornament skirmishes. But I know two things cold: procedure and evidence. Patricia, with her embossed stationery and cinderblock prophecies, had just declared war on the wrong homeowner. That evening, after Lily was in bed, I went to the porch. I picked up Barnaby. His painted eyes seemed to hold a question. "Don't worry, little guy," I whispered. "This is a tactical retreat." I brought him inside and placed him squarely in the center of the living room mantelpiece, in clear, unobstructed view from the front window. It was a loophole, and a beautiful one. The bylaws specifically governed exterior installations and lawn ornaments. My living room was a sovereign nation, a gnome sanctuary. Let her try to find me for my interior decor. Then I began my research. I went to the HOA's clunky, early 2000s website and downloaded the entire 120-page Pleasant Meadows bylaws and covenants document. I brewed a pot of coffee, got out my highlighter, and settled into my home office chair. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic overreach, a tyrannical manifesto disguised as legalese. The rules were breathtakingly, hilariously specific. I learned that my garbage can placement was a high-stakes temporal puzzle and that my shrubbery could, apparently, be guilty of excessive cheer. But I was hunting for bigger game. I needed the rules about real property changes. And I found it, Article 3, Section 1. The requirement for pre-approval of any architectural or aesthetic modification. The key was the word permanent. A gnome you can pick up is not permanent. But a sunroom? A new fence? A custom-built mailbox? The gears in my mind began to turn. A calm, focused smile spread across my face. It was time to go for a walk. The next Saturday morning, I embarked on my reconnaissance mission. I took a leisurely stroll through Pleasant Meadows, not as a resident, but as an inspector general. And oh, the beautiful, beautiful violations I saw. It was like a Where's Waldo? Of HOA hypocrisy, and Waldo was everywhere, blatantly flouting the very laws he claimed to uphold. Dave, my quiet neighbor, had repainted his shutters a daring, unapproved shade of eggshell. The Johnsons had installed a lovely, intricate trellis for their climbing roses without a single submitted form. I noted it all, my phone's camera clicking quietly, a digital ledger of petty crimes. But I was saving the main event for last. I circled the block, my heart beating a little faster as I approached the home of Patricia Whitlock herself. Her house was a monument to rules for thee, not for me. It was almost too perfect. First, her mailbox. A custom, wrought iron behemoth sculpted into a galloping horse, clearly not from the approved mailbox models list, which exclusively featured 3 bland, stamped metal designs. Click. Violation. Then the landscaping. A beautiful, sprawling wisteria vine, its purple blooms dripping with what I could only describe as excessive jubilance, was conspicuously absent from the approved flora list. Click. Violation. But the piece de resistance was around back, visible from the sidewalk if you knew where to look. A brand new, professionally constructed sunroom addition, complete with a complex foundation and new electrical wiring snaking into the main house. It was massive, beautiful, and very obviously unapproved. My folder, which I'd named Patricia's Folly, was now fat with evidence. I felt like a spy who had just stolen the enemy's battle plans. The Gnome War was over. A new, much larger conflict had just begun. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a room that smelled faintly of chlorine from the adjacent pool and quiet desperation. I arrived with my manila folder tucked under my arm, a calm smile plastered on my face. The room was filled with about 20 other residents, most looking bored or irritated. At the head of the room, behind a long table, sat Patricia, flanked by 2 other board members who seemed to be there as silent, nervous accessories. She had the severe haircut of a person who has never once encountered a stray hair she didn't despise, and she was wielding a gavel like it was Excalibur. The meeting droned on with a soul-crushing monotony. A 15-minute debate about the community pool's new no floaties over 3 feet policy. A complaint from Mr. Henderson about the Garcias dog barking at 6:02 a.m., 2 minutes into the officially recognized noise-sensitive period. Through it all, Patricia presided with an air of ultimate authority, her gavel tapping out a rhythm of total control. Finally, her eyes landed on me. "Mr. Redacted, I see you've finally decided to join us." Her voice was slick with condescension. "I trust you're here to settle your outstanding fines?" She gestured dramatically to a printed sheet. "You're up to $850 for the unapproved figurine, plus a $50 administrative fee for this unannounced visit." A few people gasped. Dave shifted uncomfortably in his seat, studying his shoes. I stood up, my posture easy. "Actually, Patricia, I'm here to discuss a matter of procedural fairness and, more importantly, the consistent enforcement of our beloved bylaws." She smirked, a tight, unpleasant expression. "The rules are the rules. They are enforced consistently and fairly across Pleasant Meadows." "Are they?" I asked, my voice calm and level, the same tone I use in my courtroom. I opened my folder with a deliberate slowness. "For instance, under Article 3, Section 1, all permanent architectural modifications require pre-approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Could you please produce the ARC approval forms for your custom wrought iron mailbox? The one with the, and I quote the bylaws, non-conforming equine motif?" The smirk vanished. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the vending machine down the hall. "Or," I continued, pulling out a crystal-clear photo, "for the wisteria vine on your property, which is not on the approved flora list under Appendix C. And while we're at it, the new sunroom edition." I couldn't find the permit notices posted, as required by county law for structures of that size. I placed the photos on the table in front of her. The sound of the paper hitting the surface was like a thunderclap. She was bright red, sputtering. "How dare you? This is a private residence. You have no right. This is an invasion of privacy." "I have the same right as every other homeowner here," I interrupted, still calm. "The right to be governed by the same set of rules. It seems the only person in significant, repeated, and willful violation of the covenants that you claim to hold so dear is you." I turned to the stunned audience. "How many of you have been fined for minor, harmless issues while the head of the compliance committee built her own personal palace against the rules?" A low murmur started. Then Dave stood up. "She fined me $200 for my shutters. She said alabaster was not winter white." Then Mrs. Johnson was on her feet. "My trellis. We got a fine just last week. You said it disturbed the visual plane." The room erupted. It was a rebellion.
Appetit, suburban uprising.
Patricia was sputtering, banging her gavel uselessly against the table. "Order. This is out of order. This meeting is adjourned." But the damage was done. The king was naked and everyone had seen the video. The following days were a whirlwind. The dam had broken, and the pent-up frustration of years of petty tyranny came flooding out. Dave, empowered by his public confession, became an unlikely revolutionary, going door to door with a petition calling for a vote of no confidence and Patricia's immediate removal from the board. It wasn't just a list of names. It was a manifesto of grievances, a scroll of suburban liberation. I provided my meticulously compiled evidence packet to several other board members who, it turned out, had been living in fear of Patricia themselves. They were tired of being her rubber stamps, of the constant complaints and the toxic atmosphere she cultivated. Emails were flying, secret meetings were held in living rooms, and the entire infrastructure of Patricia's fiefdom was crumbling around her. But a cornered animal is at its most dangerous. Patricia wasn't going to resign gracefully. The day after the meeting, I came home from work to find another letter. This one wasn't in the mailbox. It was taped directly to my front door, slapped on there with a violence that had wrinkled the paper. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten, scrawled in a furious, shaky script that veered across the page. The ink blotted in places with what looked like the ghost of a teardrop or a drop of wine. "You think you're so smart. You've ruined everything I built. You've turned them all against me. This was my community. Mine. You'll see. You'll all see. You can't win." It was unhinged. The civic-minded facade had completely shattered, revealing something brittle, paranoid, and deeply unstable. The phrase "you can't win" wasn't a prediction. It was a threat. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This was no longer about bylaws or board positions. I immediately called the non-emergency police line and filed a report, reading the note verbatim to the dispatcher. An officer came by, took the note as evidence, and promised to have a car patrol our street a little more frequently. But as he drove away, the silence felt heavier, more menacing. The victory from the meeting felt hollow and distant. We had won the battle, but the war had just taken a very dark, very personal turn. The officer's promise of extra patrols did little to settle my nerves. That night, sleep was a fractured, anxious thing. I drifted off around 1 a.m., only to be jolted awake what felt like minutes later by a sound I'll never forget. A soft whoosh, followed immediately by the frantic, piercing shriek of the smoke alarm. But it was the smell that truly froze my blood. The thick, cloying, unmistakable scent of gasoline, already being chased by the acrid tang of burning wood. I didn't think. I just moved. Fire! Sarah! Lily now! I roared, vaulting out of bed. I slammed open Lily's door, scooped my terrified, sleep-confused daughter into my arms, and shoved my wife toward the hallway. The smoke was already a choking, black fog, but we stumbled down the stairs, our path illuminated by a terrifying, flickering orange glow coming from the front of the house. We burst out the back door into the cool night air, coughing and clutching each other on the lawn. The fire department arrived with shocking speed, their sirens slicing through the quiet night. But it was already too late. The fire, which the marshal would later confirm started in a gasoline-soaked pile of old newspapers and landscaping mulch right against our front porch, had raced up the vinyl siding and found the home's old bones. We stood across the street, huddled under a blanket a neighbor had brought, watching in mute horror as flames engulfed the place that held all our memories. The orange glow didn't just illuminate our house. It painted the entire cul-de-sac in a hellish light, reflecting in the wide, shocked eyes of our neighbors who had gathered in their pajamas. And there, standing at the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, was Patricia. She wasn't in a robe. She was dressed as if she'd been waiting. She just watched, her arms crossed, a strange, serene, almost satisfied expression on her face. There was no shock, no concern, only validation. The fire marshal, a grim-faced man with soot on his coat, found the empty gas can tossed carelessly into my scorched azalea bushes. It was traced to a local hardware store, and the security footage from earlier that evening showed a figure in a hoodie, but with an unmistakable, severe haircut, paying in cash. Her fingerprints were all over the can. She was arrested on my neighbor's lawn, not even putting up a fight, her eyes never leaving the smoldering wreck of my home. Our house was a total loss. Everything was gone. And Barnaby the gnome, safe on the mantelpiece, was now just a pile of ceramic dust, a final, petty casualty in her war for control. The following week, I was back at work. The routine was a sterile comfort, the polished floors and quiet halls a world away from the ash and chaos. My family was safe, staying in a fully furnished rental house paid for by our insurance. The community had rallied around us in a way I'd never have imagined before the Gnome War. Dave started a meal train. The Johnsons brought over brand new clothes for Lily. Even the HOA board sent a formal letter of condolence and a gift basket, a move so steeped in awkward bureaucracy it was almost endearing. I was in my chambers, reviewing the day's docket, the familiar names and case numbers a balm to my frayed nerves, when my clerk, Sarah, popped her head in. Judge, the first case is a motion to reduce bail. Case number 73409, State versus Whitlock, Patricia. I stilled. The universe, it seemed, had a truly wicked, perfectly poetic sense of humor. I took a slow, steadying breath, the weight of the robe on my shoulders suddenly feeling profound, heavier than any legal precedent. Thank you, Sarah. I'll be out in a moment. I stood, straightening the black fabric. I walked out into the courtroom, the familiar scent of lemon polish and old wood filling my senses. I took my seat on the bench, high above the rest of the room. And there she was, Patricia Whitlock, in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that looked absurdly loud against the room's muted tones, her wrists chained in front of her. Her lawyer, a young public defender, was whispering to her frantically. She looked up, her eyes scanning the bench with a kind of numb exhaustion. And for the first time, she saw me. Really saw me. Not as the gnome guy, not as the nuisance at the HOA meeting. She saw the black robe, the gavel in my hand, the impassive expression, the absolute authority that radiated from this specific chair, in this specific room. Her face, once a mask of smug superiority, completely crumpled. All the color drained from it, leaving a waxy, gray pallor. Her jaw went slack. She looked like a puppet with its strings cut, like she was seeing the ghost of every petty fine and nasty letter she'd ever sent, all manifested in the person she had tried to destroy. She looked like she was going to be sick. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the state opposes any reduction in bail. The defendant is a clear flight risk and poses a significant, demonstrated danger to the community. Her defense attorney stood, clearing his throat. Your Honor, my client is a longtime resident with deep ties to the area. She is not a flight risk. I looked down at Patricia, at the utter ruin of her in that moment. I felt no anger, no vengeance. In that crystalline moment, I just felt a profound, bottomless pity. The pettiness, the desperate need for control, it had all culminated in this. Her life in ashes, facing decades in a cage, staring up at the one man whose home she burned, who now held a small but significant piece of her fate in his hands. I listened to both arguments with a detached, professional calm. I was the picture of judicial impartiality. Finally, I spoke, my voice even and resonant in the quiet room. Having reviewed the facts of this case, and considering the serious, premeditated nature of the charges, which include the willful destruction of a family's home and the reckless endangerment of human life, the court finds that the defendant does indeed pose a significant, ongoing danger to this community. The motion to reduce bail is denied. I brought the gavel down. Crack. The sound was clean, sharp, and final. It echoed in the silent room, a period at the end of this horrifying sentence. It was the most satisfying sound I've ever heard. More satisfying than any, I told you so, any public shaming, any overturned HOA fine. Justice, it turns out, isn't always about winning a petty argument over a garden gnome. Sometimes it's about watching the person who burned your house to the ground realize too late that they just walked into the one room where you make all the rules. And sometimes, justice is simply a well-made gavel, and the silence that follows its fall.